Hello everyone, this is John again, and we are returning to my Koine Greek tutoring sessions. In our last section, okay, which was part 2, we went over, okay, in part 2 of the study guide, and if you don't have this study guide, please see the description of the video, and you'll find a link where you can download it. We were in part 2 of part 2. Here it is. What did we go over? We went over Greek objects, subjects, okay, and the relation to Greek verbs, prepositions, and more. So we got into this. We got into what the Greek subject is. It's the thing or the person in a sentence that's usually in the nominative case that's doing the action in the Greek sentence. And the way that you can be able to spot it is, again, look for its nominative case. And we gave some examples of that with tis here in the nominative case, a man, okay? So he's the one doing the action. We saw that here in this example. And if you need a review, please go back and review that video. Also, what we did was we went over a little bit about the object. And we start talking about how the subject, which is represented by this train, puts action on the object, which is represented by this car. The train's doing the action, it smashes into the car. The subject of a sentence doing the action, it affects the object which is represented by this car. So, how do we know something is the object in a Greek sentence? Look at it. Look at its form or its case. Has it been altered from the nominative? If it's in any other case, then pretty much 95% out of the time, it's going to be the object. And it basically went from the nominative case to a different case, which could be the accusative, the genitive, or any other ones. And we're going to go over the cases again later in subsequent lessons. So, the object gets altered into another case, just as this car got altered. This car used to be a normal looking car, but once it got hit, it was altered. So that's exactly what happens to the Greek object. Its form changes just like this car's form is changed. So we started talking about a little bit here in B that a subject, in a sense, uses two kinds of verbs that do active, has a active meaning. And that's active and middle. We went over the active, which are the ones that end in omega. They put action on the object. So we left off on 2, middle or deponent verbs. Okay, let's just do a quick review of these. And note this whole section here, this is very key to understanding how these verbs work. For excellent teaching website, go to inthesaltshaker.com, and I give them complete credit for their work. Let me just show you this. It's a fantastic website for basically learning Greek, and just go around with it, play around with it, and look at all that basically it has to offer. And it has some fantastic Greek teaching materials. And we're going to use it a little bit more later in subsequent lessons. The word deponent means set aside. A deponent verb is a verb which has been set aside, which has set aside its original present, active, indicative, active forms. Or at least the active forms are not used very often. Those forms, okay, that you saw here above. Well, we used some examples of active verbs. I haven't really shown you yet their forms. We went over the endings, and here in the last part here on 1, we talked about them. For example, I said that they all end with omega. And we gave the example of echo, I have, okay? So, these active forms of the deponents are not used very often. Instead, a deponent verb is almost always seen in its middle passive forms. with middle or passive personal endings, like ome, which is what I showed you above. And then, of course, in the other persons. I for you, ete for he, she, it, ome, tha, we, este, you in the plural, and onde, they. Okay, and what we said here, its middle passive forms usually bear a meaning or definition in the active voice. This is pretty much all you need to know here. A definition which is not the original active form's definition, simply converted into the middle or passive voice. However, it seems that a middle or passive interpretation can occasionally be applied to a deponent verb, and this can happen. And again, we're going to get a little bit more into what passive verbs are. But middle and passive pretty much are the same thing, and we're going to note subtle differences between the two. This can also, it can also be interpreted with its true and original middle or passive meanings at times. So, a deponent verb is what it's saying is, it can either be middle or passive in its meaning, just as its middle passive inflections indicate. In some commentaries and linguistic guides to the Greek New Testament, you will sometimes see a deponent verb called middle or passive form and defined with its real middle or passive meaning. But a deponent verb usually is interpreted with a meaning in the active voice. Note this. Again, context is the key to understanding the intended meaning. Most deponent verbs convey a totally active meaning. This is pretty much all you need to know. All you need to know. A few even have active forms which mean exactly the same thing as their passive deponent forms. A few even have active forms which mean exactly the same thing as their middle passive deponent form, meaning there's no difference in other words, this meaning here, the meaning in this type of situation is the same. You can interpret, in other words, as active, middle, or passive. Other deponents may have an active interpretation, okay, meaning they're acting, they're putting action on object, yet also have forms in the active voice which have a slightly different meaning. So there's subtleties here. Then again, some deponents bear some middle or passive connotations, yet their meanings are not really what they should be, not truly just middle or passive interpretations derived from the original verb's lexical meaning in the active voice. Also, some verbs are only deponent in their future tense. See, so in the future, they'll appear as deponent. But all their other middle or passive forms are not deponent. So there's subtleties here. So as word power mentions, there are even occasional quote-unquote reverse deponents to verbs whose active forms carry a passive meaning. So they can look like an active verb that end with the omega but act as a passive. He gives the example of apolola, meaning I have been destroyed. Okay? I have been destroyed. Its perfect active form, it is a perfect active form of apolimi. Apolimi. When you look at apolimi, this is pretty much a middle passive form, the way it looks. It's kind of like those verbs like I described that end in ome. Yet in the perfect, though, it looks like it's active. But really the meaning, though, what it's saying here, is what? It is passive. So these are what we call reverse deponents. So go over this section, read it, and we're going to get a little bit into this here. Now this is the key part to understanding and recognizing deponent verbs. A verb which is deponent in one tense, such as in the future tense, is not always deponent in the other tenses. This can happen. However, when a verb is deponent in the present tense, it usually is deponent in all other tenses. Note this, however, when a verb is deponent in the present tense with that ome ending, it usually is deponent in all other tenses. So don't freak out about all these anomalies or subtle differences in deponent verbs. The general principle, the general key here to recognizing them is here. However, when a deponent verb is in its present tense, okay, you're seeing it as ome. It usually is deponent in all the other tenses. Okay, the way it's going to look. A verb which is deponent in its lexical form, having no active form listed in the lexicon, only its present middle form with a present active meaning, will likely have an active meaning for all its other tenses, even though their forms use the middle passive endings as well. This is a general principle situation here that you need to mark down and note. Okay? And this is going to save you a lot of hassle. So there are some anomalies is what I'm saying, but what it's saying here is a verb which is basically deponent the way you see it in the dictionary, and it has no active form listed in the lexicon. Okay? Because some deponent verbs can have an active form also listed in the lexicon. Okay? So usually when you look up this verb in this situation, you would have to look it up in its active form first, and then it'll refer to, okay, its deponent form. This is very key. All right? So having no active form listed in the lexicon in this situation, only its present middle passive form with that ome ending again, okay, again that's the first person, present, singular, with a present active meaning will likely have an active meaning for all its other tenses. It's going to act like an active verb, even though their forms use the middle passive endings as well. So we'll get into this. But note this. Let's go over some examples of middle deponent verbs as per our same as above mentioned website in the saltshaker.com. All right. Notice both the form of these verbs, but also their meaning and impact on potential objects. Okay, we're going to take a verb here. Igeome, which means I lead the way, take the lead, am the chief, preside, govern, I rule, I think, I consider, I count, I esteem, I regard. See that? Now, look at the ending. Ome. See that? Ome. All right, deponent verb. But look at it though. Look at its definition. I lead the way. That to me sounds like it's active. Nothing's happening to me. So therefore it's not a passive verb, right? I take the lead. That's taking action, isn't it? I'm the chief. I preside. But look at it here. Ome. It's not an omega ending. Now note, certainly as indicated above, leading people is an action. For example, let's take, for example, a Greek sentence. Igite tu ochlu. Igite tu ochlu. And again, I'm not using the Erasmian pronunciation in my Greek lessons. I want to note that. I'm using the modern Greek pronunciation. There's a reason why. And basically, the modern Greek pronunciation is a lot easier for me to teach Greek. And we'll get into the Erasmian pronunciation in other subsequent lessons. For example, igite tu ochlu means he leads the crowd. With the verb here, to lead, igeome, here it is. Putting action on the crowd, to ochlu, here it is. Here's the object. See that? Now note, it's in the genitive. Because this type of verb, when it puts action on an object, it puts the object into the genitive, not the accusative. So you have to note, again, what type of verbs put certain types of actions on certain types of nouns, which are the objects, via what type of cases. It's not always going to be the active, dative, or in this case, the genitive. We'll go over this later. Notice too that the object of crowd again is in the genitive case because depending on the type of verb, middle or active, because remember again both do action on the object. Note this. Okay? And again, middle is pretty much the same thing as deponent, but there are subtle differences, and we'll go over this. You'll get used to this. And again, that's what we just talked about here. So, depending on the type of verb, middle or active, with its respective action, leading, giving, sending, etc., whatever the type of action is, the case, which could be genitive, accusative, etc., of the object will be determined. That's how the case of the object is determined. Not all objects use the same case. Again, if you have not gone over all the cases for nouns and adjectives yet, please review them now. You may have already gone over this in your seminary lessons. However, because the cases are so important in tying in the whole lesson together, we will subsequently go over them. You already, though, have gotten a taste of the cases in the above sections in 1E and in 2A. But as I alluded earlier, cases depend on prepositions and verbs. These two factors right here will determine the cases, okay, of objects and subjects. Let's go to another verb here. Evangelizome. Evangelizome. Okay? Ome ending. This is a deponent verb. I proclaim as a good message. Announce a good message of. Address with a good message. Address with a gospel teaching. Evangelize. Okay? Now, this here is a deponent verb, and it's doing an action. It's evangelizing. Okay? Now, it says here, though, note the present indicative active form. It has one. Evangelizo, notice the omicron ending, also means exactly the same thing. I address with a good message. This is a compound word derived from the adverb ev, meaning good, well, happily, and the noun agelia, a proclamation. So, this can happen where this here deponent verb is the same and it's active. So you just have to know the differences, and it takes a while to learn them. Iaome, I heal, I cure. I heal spiritually. I restore from a state of sin or condemnation. This verb is used a lot in ancient times, and basically it means to heal the soul. There's a type of verb to heal the body, okay, but this, which this verb can be used for, but more specifically, okay, it means to heal the soul. So, make sure to read the rest, okay, of these middle deponent verbs from my recommended site here in the Salt Shaker. So, just go to there, and you're going to have to review these. And it's extensive. Deponent verbs, okay? And all the information is here. And here, basically, you can see what I'm talking about. All right? And there's a section here where it's called the should-be deponents, meaning a deponent has an active form, but its middle form, though, is different, though. It has a different meaning, okay? So both can do an action, ereo, ereome, for example, but they're doing a different type of action. It's not necessarily going to be the same action. You would think it would be, because usually that's how this works, and that's the key here to know. A middle verb, if it has an active form, okay, will pretty much mean this, that the active form is doing a simple object, whereas the middle is doing the same object, has the same meaning, but more particularly for a special purpose for itself. What it's showing you here is there are some here verbs that are called should be, basically, where if it's deponent, okay, it has a particular type of meaning. For example, ereome, which means I choose. Its active form will not be similar, will not be the same. So for example, ereome, I choose, but ereo means I take away. It's different. So those are subtle differences in certain types of deponent verbs. And you're going to have to know that and go over that. If this comes up in your Greek classes or your tests or whatever, and it's very extensive. So this all depends on how deep you're going to get into Greek. In the following part 3, we'll go over how the cases of nouns and adjectives are formed and how they are impacted by verbs and prepositions. This is very key now, part 3. Cases. We went over a little bit about this, right? Prepositions. Okay, we're going to go over this. Objects and verbs and how they all interact with each other to tell the Greek story. Now we're going to start telling a story. Now you're really going to start understanding Greek. This is where now all starts coming together. And look, it only took us about 3 lessons to get there. Okay, we have gone over adjectives a little bit. The subject, a little on the object and verbs. Active ones, middle deponent, and active verbs. In this lesson, we'll put the piece of the puzzle together, and then you will begin to see the big picture. Trying to learn Greek without going through all these steps as I have described them, and of course without learning about the noun cases, as I will be describing them here, is futile. Trust me, I've studied Greek for 15 years. Listen to me. Go through my system. It will basically put you on a track to understanding Greek, and if you're a seminary student, to help you learn enough to pass your midterm exam, because that's really what it's going to boil down to, unless you're going to spend years and years and years studying Greek like me, because I'm a total Greek geek. So it's like a detective, okay, trying to solve a difficult case with limited facts. If you don't go over this here, you're like a detective trying to solve a very difficult case with very limited clues. So he will bring out a false conclusion. That's what will happen. If a detective doesn't have all his facts, he'll bring out a false conclusion in his investigation. Well, so it is with Greek. Each part of the Greek grammar, nouns and their cases, verbs and their tenses, etc., is literally like the critical facts to solving a mystery, a police investigation, or whatever your imagination can liken it to. You will see your knowledge of Greek, you will see as your knowledge of Greek begins to increase and deepen. You're going to start seeing all this. However, if you pace yourself, trust the potential of your memory, recognize and pick up patterns in Greek grammar, and stay positive, you begin to flow with Greek just like English. You'll be able to basically start, thinking in Greek, speaking in Greek. Everything will start flowing just as you started learning English as you were growing up. Greek will make your memory, though, sharper and your thinking skills keener. This has been established through scientific evidence. Greek will make you smarter, just like learning math, because here it is, in a nutshell, Greek is math. Every single letter corresponds to a number. And all the major words in the dictionary have special hidden meanings, and which can be deciphered once you add up all the numerical values of each letter. And I'll give you a quick example. Omicron. When you add up the numerical values of all the letters of Omicron, mi, iota, kappa, rho, Omicron, ni, it totals 360. Well, Omicron is a circle shape. And what is the circumference, the degrees of a circle? 360. Greek is very powerful. Each letter corresponds to a number. There are also hidden mathematical formulas, like I said, in each letter number. But this is for another lesson. We'll get into that. But I will tell you this, that over the centuries, the secret and elite societies in Europe and America learn Greek. All major universities used to require students to learn both Latin and Greek. Latin, of course, comes from Greek, but that's another lesson too. Tip, eat the elephant one bite at a time. Piece the puzzle together one piece at a time. Okay, let's go over our first objective in this lesson, objects. We're going to get more deeper. Let's go back to our image in section 2A. Here it is again. Train is what the subject, it's striking what the car, which is what the object. What do we notice here about this poor car being hit? It's smashed up, altered, right? While the same in effect happens to Greek nouns and adjectives that are objects. They are changed. Their form changes. This car is now changed, forever changed. Why? You might ask, because this is how Greek works. Why you may ask, because this is how Greek works. We tell a story and get very descriptive, detailed, and vivid for the sake of the imagination. English today cannot do this. This is why Greek is so important. It's such a powerful language. Now, the Greek's object can be changed by active Greek verbs, middle deponent, or just plain active ones that are associated, again, with the subject of the sentence, which is doing the action on the object. Okay, but this part of the lesson now requires us to review the Greek cases if you haven't not already done that. Okay, so what we're going to do in our next lesson, we're going to get deep into Greek cases. And we're going to tell you how they all work. And basically, this is something that you really need to pay attention and focus on, because here's what I'm going to leave you with. Know basically how prepositions and verbs can alter or can determine the case of objects primarily, but also subjects in a Greek sentence. Know that. This is the key here. And we'll cover that in a subsequent lesson. We're going to leave you here with this. Please go over and review what I've talked about here. And know again how those middle deponent verbs work. And it's not very difficult. You will get used to it. Thank you very much.